the three aspects, and what I come up with this title, Code, Community, and Commerce, is because having put together a project called Social Learn and been working on it for 2 years, to answer someone's question, what do you do if you don't use Facebook? Well, what we've been trying to do is solve that problem. What do we do if we're not going to use Facebook? And come up with something called Social Learn, which I'll say a bit more later. And there were three aspects to it. Believe it or not, you actually have to build something, as tedious as that is, and that's my job. And we put together what I guess we thought was a dream team. Three of us, me for code, community was a colleague called Martin Weller, well, two really, who's an A-list blogger. For those of you, Ed Techie is his blog. Check it out. It's really good. A guy called Simon Buckingham-Shum, who speaks the same language as George. He's Mr. Connection at the Open University. And then, unfortunately, there was the commercial aspect to it as well. Was there revenue generation in this project? So those are maybe three themes that feature in this. And the reason for it is that we know an awful lot, I hope you can see that, about our students, an awful lot. We know what they like, what they hate. And we've been always aware of the fact that we have to take account of that and not ignore that, not just do what we think. And that's really, really important. You know, we know that they like cool stuff, and we know they hate complexity. Those are just two of the things on that slide. And certainly, they've always had this stuff. You know, I'm not going to get into the digital natives and digital immigrants. I think that's been overplayed. My benchmark is always my own kids, like most people my generation. You know, what do your kids do? What are they interested in? My 16-year-old daughter broke her personal record last month. She sent 2,300 text messages in 1 month. I think that's pretty good going. She said some of her friends have sent more. My other daughter, who's a bit older, lives in Facebook 5 hours a day, easily 5 hours a day on top of work and normal life. I don't know whether she sleeps or not. And so that is their world. Interesting enough, I was saying to Jay last night at dinner, that same daughter who sends all the text messages and also lives in systems like Facebook, also buys 3 magazines a week. And it's quite interesting, sitting in the living room with her laptop on her lap with a magazine on the laptop. Yet those magazines all have websites, and she could read the same material online. And it's quite interesting that she still likes paper. So really, we have to recognize that our students have digital lives. And most of our, 75% of our students are in full-time employment. So they have work lives as well. So we've got to get this balance right. We have to recognize that people come to us with all of this stuff already, and we can't just impose our solutions on them. Another theme, and I know Jay will almost certainly be going on about this tomorrow, informal learning. For some reason, there's always been this artificial barrier between informal and formal learning. I think the same applies to training as well. Institutions try and impose top-down training as if, you know, you will go on this course and you will be a better employee, which is crazy, and almost ignore the fact that actually I read some magazine article, which I learned a hell of a lot more from that than any course I've ever been on. And that permeates throughout higher education. But I'll leave that to George to go on at length, Jay, sorry, to go on at length about that. Hopefully you'll be talking about that tomorrow, Jay. And really, we've got to move from a situation where historically, you know, the student has had to adapt. It's all been about the teacher and really put the student at the center of the whole experience, you know, and the whole system has to adapt to what the learner wants. Now that could be good old instructor, and if you remember things called blackboards, if you're old enough. It doesn't matter. You can involve an instructor in this stuff, but the student has got to be at the center of it, because really, this is where they live, you know, and it doesn't matter which, anything you think of that they might be interested in, any activity that they undertake, there's something out there for them. It gets back to this question about what is the right technology. Well, there is no right technology, because I could redo this chart, you know, every month, and I'd probably be able to put different icons in it. The other cool thing is that almost everything on there is free, or the vast majority of this stuff is free. We might talk a bit about what free means in a minute, but notionally, you don't hand over money initially to get in and use it. But it's certainly where they live, and we need to recognize that. So I'm not going to go on about the Open University, lots of statistics, you know, our size and scale, et cetera. We've got an awful lot of students. I mean, the only thing that I would mention in terms of methods and technologies, which is my favorite Open University statistic, is that in 1979, we had 19,000 students online. They're using very dumb terminals and dedicated study terminal sites around the United Kingdom, but they're accessing remote databases, et cetera. So, you know, people have been doing stuff online for a long time, and we've known for a long time that our students love the new technologies and are always pushing the curve and pushing us forward. but the openness, and I should have said that these 4 opens, people, places, methods, and ideas, has been our mission statement since our inception. We're 40 years old this year. But in this day and age, there's other opens that become relevant. Open source is increasingly relevant. Open educational resources. I'll say a bit about what we're doing in those areas in a minute. Open economics. There's no end of books been written about it. And suddenly there's, all of you that got MBAs 20 years ago, I guess, can throw them away because all the models are being rewritten about how you make money and what works and does you give stuff away and make money is not something that was ever taught, I suppose, at Harvard Business School. And open social, this whole thing, what this event is all about, is self-evident. And just as a final thing, we can't be doing everything wrong because they have student satisfaction surveys in the UK and we're always top or second every year in these surveys. I don't know what these surveys mean, but you know, I think our students do like what we're trying to do. So okay, let's get the boring stuff out of the way. We do have a VLE, of course, because every university in the Western world and maybe even the Eastern world has a VLE. Ours has been around since 2006. We already had a huge online presence in around 2005, early 2006. We decided to integrate the Moodle open source learning management system into our online offering, and overnight became the world's largest Moodle developer. And I was told I had the world's largest Moodle development team. I had twice as many developers at my disposal as Martin Duguiamas, who's Mr. Moodle in Australia. Yeah, but what Martin doesn't like me saying, but I'll say it anyway, is that Moodle is an open source vendor as opposed to a commercial vendor. It is still a vendor. Moodle is a shrink-wrap box. You can download it, it's a package, and you can run it. You just don't pay license fees. You spend your money in other ways. But that's good, that's really good, because instead of giving Blackboard all our money, or put another way, we decided to strategically invest to try and adapt the Moodle system to meet our teaching and business needs, rather than to give Blackboard the money and adapt our teaching and business needs to their view of how online learning and teaching takes place. So I think strategically it was a smart move. If you're interested in Moodle, it does scale. We've got an awful lot of people in there. That's the least of our problems. But our new Vice Chancellor, who joined us in early October, his previous employer was the evil empire Microsoft, believe it or not, although he was only there for 4 years. He's not a lifer. A gentleman called Martin Bean, very charismatic, dynamic individual. He gave his first public keynote in the UK about a month ago at a big educational technology conference, ALT-C, in the United Kingdom. And at one point in his talk, he actually said to the great and good of the UK higher education world, do you really think your students want to hang out in your VLE? I don't think so. And so that is good news for people like me, that my chief executive is in effect saying students are not going to hang out in here. They will use it as a tool. It will not be their, their world. Okay, Facebook, like everybody else, we've got a presence in Facebook. Now the Facebook thing, and I very much enjoyed Alejandro's presentation, and it's interesting what you can do in Facebook. What we did was we put some of our courses, our cut-down versions of our courses in Facebook, and what we found was that students, all of our courses have names and these course codes. The first letter denotes the faculty, so arts courses begin with A, and then letters. The first number is the year, so A102 is an arts course, level 1. And what we found was that students formed communities around our courses based on, we had students who had previously studied the course, students who are currently studying, and students who were thinking of studying it, and they all joined together in communities. So that was very informative, but they were having a less than satisfactory experience. But it did show that community around learning was possible if you did it right. Obviously YouTube as well, we've got a large YouTube presence, and for those of you that know anything about our organization, we started off with this big television presence in the days before cable television. So there was 20 hours being broadcast from the BBC late at night when there was nothing on television to watch. So we had millions of people watching our programs. That is all gone, and instead we now have these sort of shows which go out at prime time. They're all of general interest, and they compete with normal broadcast hours. And then the BBC has something called the iPlayer, like a lot of networks, and the take-up of this system has been absolutely phenomenal, as you can see, to the BBC's wildest expectations. It's easy to dismiss traditional broadcasting as being significant, but I've checked these figures because I actually didn't believe them myself, But our television programs that go out on the BBC and then get syndicated in India and other countries, I'm told have annually are viewed by 1 billion people. Now that's not a billion individual people, but they have 1 billion views a year. Well, that's significant, and that's significant viewing. So you can't dismiss traditional media completely. One of the side effects of the iPlayer is there's serious concerns in the UK about it destroying the bandwidth, available bandwidth to internet users, because it is the amount of data that is being downloaded, because the viewing audiences suddenly realize that they don't have to watch programs when the BBC says they watch them. We can become our own broadcasters. I know there's lots of networks in the United States that are offering similar things to this. And I think that's another example how the viewer, even the traditional passive television viewer, wanting to take control, never mind the learner. Some of you will be aware of our Open Education Resource Initiative, originally funded by the Hewlett Foundation in the United States. They gave us an awful lot of money, and remarkably, in about 4 months, we published 900 hours. There's now over 6,000 hours of quality assured OU material, freely available. Just Google Open Learn and you'll find it. You can take it, you can do what you want with it. It covers hundreds of subject areas, and it's yours for free to play with, to remix, to upload, whatever you want to do with it. And there's about another 8,000 hours of other OU material there as well that you can have for nothing. Just take it and do it, and we'll continue to publish into that. iTunes U is something else. So we've got a very large presence. We've been pretty successful in publishing this sort of stuff, and I can bore you with the stats, but you know, an awful lot of people are accessing this stuff as well. So people are taking this stuff, but what they're not doing in any great number is giving it back. And that was one of the things that the Social Learning Project, which I mentioned, set out to address. Why is it that people, excuse me, will quite happily take open education resources and say thank you very much, but what they're not going to do is remix it, improve it, and then give it back? But that's exactly what everybody does in Flickr. That's what everyone does in YouTube. Every time someone uses Flickr or YouTube, they make it better, because if it's Flickr, they've added a photograph. Every time you buy something from Amazon, you improve Amazon's database, it improves the recommendations. Why isn't that happening in learning? Now, we are, all of those things I've just been talking about, we are all pulling them all together under one banner. We're rebranding the Open Learn thing, so fairly soon all of the stuff I've just been talking about will all be together from one spot. Okay, I couldn't resist talking about coding. I always used to think that because my role has traditionally been, although I've got an academic background, that I'm at the end of the day the guy who's responsible for building things like RVLE and Open Learn and all of these systems. And I always said I've got the easiest job, because if someone can clearly define what they want, building it is the easy bit. And that's always been the traditional view. But unfortunately, code these days, our developers come to us and say, well, we can do it in Ruby, we can do it in Python, we can do it in PHP. And suddenly, there's a real problem. Not only do you have all these programming languages, you've got all these frameworks sitting behind them as well. So PHP has got about 5 different frameworks you can use. And there's J2E, and then, or you can just use Drupal, which is a content management system, which is a world on its own. So, you know, .NET, I guess, not many of you using .NET, but nonetheless, these are all solutions. There's Rails and Grails, and it's very, very difficult to know what is the best thing to do. And then we've got the Facebook world. It's not just a question of using Facebook. Facebook published an API, a developer toolkit. You can actually develop your own Facebook, in effect, if you trust Facebook and you trust it as being a viable community. That is an option as well. And then there's good old Google with all of this sort of stuff. Open Social, which is gaining a lot of traction. The whole world of gadgets is pretty cool. The whole Google Docs thing is cool. And then we've got maybe the sinister Google Chrome. Now, Chrome might seem like a cool idea, but I was thinking about this the other night and suddenly thought, if Google developed Chrome the way they say they're going to develop it, it's a bit like Microsoft suddenly replacing XP on this PC with Vista, because they decide, I've got to use Vista. They will be totally in control. And that is quite a frightening prospect. So, but it is an option to work within that sphere as well. So the people like myself who have to make decisions about strategy, what is the best way to do this stuff, you know, suddenly have got too many choices, you know, almost bring back the days of basic programming, or when there was just HTML. It was a lot easier. just a thing about, then the other thing about open source and commercial, as I've already said, our decision about Moodle. But again, when we started SocialLearn, our institution was very concerned about what we said and didn't say, and some of our A-list bloggers actually got their hands smacked for blogging about it and are not allowed to say, and getting people to sign NDAs. I think because the original idea was this could be a revenue generating. I mean, SocialLearn was conceived as something which would provide a sustainability model for open educational resources. The Apple's iTunes News stuff that we publish looks great, but it costs a fortune to produce. Well, how do you sustain that? How do you sustain publishing open educational resources? To some extent, you can make it a byproduct of your core production, but at the end of the day, there is a cost and somebody has to pay. Our new executive is now more interested in extending the university's reach, and it's less about money. So suddenly, we've moved from a can't talk about it to actually, we might open source this whole thing. And that is the likely result, is that going forward, what I'll say a bit about later, will all be open sourced, and we'll build it as a worldwide community, and everyone can do everything they want with it, rather than try and have some sort of lockdown thing that we've got to protect the IP on. But there is this e-commerce dimension to it, but e-commerce has two sides. There's real money, and the real money thing is interesting because, depending on who you believe, YouTube loses between $70 million and $470 million a year. I've never heard anyone claim that Facebook actually makes any money. So where does all the money come from, and can you really earn money? In fact, the only site I know of that could be called loosely a social networking site that actually makes money is something called Club Penguin, which is now owned by Disney, and I believe they make at least $50 million a year. They've got a beautiful model. Your kids can go on this site. It's really good. I've looked at it myself. My grandkids use it. It does all sorts of nice things for free, but if you want to pay a very small amount, £5 a month, $5 I think in North America, you can do all this other stuff, and you decide. And that's pretty cool, and they actually make money, so good luck to them. But their problem is what happens when the kids are using it get older. There's no guarantee that the next generation will be interested. So they don't have, they don't keep their market for long, and they could have problems in the past. There's a beautiful Creative Commons and GNU and all this sort of stuff, which is great, where people increasingly can make stuff available and say, you can do what you want with this, but if you change it, then you've got to attribute, and there's various licensing models, and that's great as well. So any sort of approach in an open social networking type of thing can cater for both. You can give stuff away and you can allow people to pay. So, we've looked at the notion of learning mentors, and it's quite nice. Someone could come in and offer the services for free. Someone else could charge, and with ratings, you decide. The community decides who's good and who isn't good. And there's a million books been written about this stuff. I'm sure you all know all these books, and so there's plenty of stuff in the literature about the e-commerce side of things. Okay, so I've already said a bit about SocialLearn, and one of the reasons that we weren't interested in the Facebook approach was that because in education, you don't just want to be with people like yourself. You actually want to be challenged. That's how you learn something, by being challenged. And you don't just hang out with friends, but you're actually hanging out with people who have common interests in learning. And they might not actually be your friends, but what you do have is a common learning interest. And rather than informal chat, you really are having learning conversations. Now, what we found was, as I go through these things weren't happening in Facebook. So how do you make them? How do you make these things happen? And obviously, you've actually got in-depth learning going on rather than just quick facts. People in Facebook exchange little snippets, photographs, and everything. But how do you create learning experiences? And obviously, saying that a learning resource has got 3 stars doesn't mean a heck of a lot. It'd rather be nice that there was a bit more depth with endorsement, and someone said that's really good. They're telling you why it's really good, and if enough people are telling you that a learning resource is really good, then you might be convinced that it's worth your while to use it. And obviously, you actually want a world of connections, and I don't have time to go into all the work we're doing around connections, but and George has articulated it very well. I mean, that's a hugely important part of this whole area, how you connect ideas and thoughts together. And obviously, we also want learning recommendations. I'll say a wee bit more about that as I go forward with this thing. Okay, so there's a number of building blocks. to be honest, I could have shown you an awful lot more. I could have actually demonstrated the system because we do have a prototype. What we did was we had an early prototype that we ran with a small number of people. We then built what we called a closed beta, which ran for 2 months with an invited group of about 1,400 people. And rather than putting them into an empty vessel, we based it around the subject of climate change. And we pre-populated it with resources that were specifically generated for people to have access to, so that there was stuff that they could easily find, but then there was the whole world of the web as well. And we even paid people to be learning mentors, to actually be in there, and sort of pseudo, and not actually take money from anybody, but just to try and simulate the experience of having an environment of this sort. The project at the moment, up till now, has been run as a strategic project in the university with a new vice chancellor, a new executive. It's now been decided to pull it into the core of the university as part of the core infrastructure of the university, and to be part of the learning and teaching portfolio rather than the strategic portfolio. Unfortunately, what that means is that there's a change of thought about what it even looks like and a change of emphasis. So I'm afraid I've had a pro-vice chancellor go through my slides and said, oh, you can't say that and you can't say that. So I'm afraid I'm going to speak a wee bit more generally, formally with slides, but by all means grab me informally and I'll tell you everything I know about it. But formally, I'm afraid I've been gagged a wee bit. But the building blocks, there's obviously the social networking and the community side of it, and we all know that that is really crucial. How do you create a significantly large learning community? The likelihood is what we will do is that we will launch this thing rather than to the world initially, we will launch it to the wider open university community, and that's rather large. We have 500,000 people, alumni, people currently studying, and we know all about them. We communicate with them electronically. So if we can create a learning community, an active learning community with 500,000 Open University former, previous, thinking about becoming students, we can have the confidence to then give it away to the world and say, here you go, have a go with this thing. So that's obviously a key part of it. An open platform, hopefully it will be open, it'll be open source for all to play with. And then there's the more complex area, what we call conceptual networking. And really, that really came out of some work. This goes back to the 70s, this sort of issue-based information system, where you're addressing an issue and you want an answer, and then you want to support and challenge. So it's this whole issue of argumentation, which we see as the critical thinking and a key part of the learning. And then, of course, you can have a number of answers and different arguments taking place. And then learners and educators can contribute. So someone might just post a comment, someone else might add resources to enhance that contribution. And now we're really getting down to more specifically about asking a question, because what we decided was that one of the hardest things about learning is knowing what question to ask. And if you can have a system that, as you start to ask a question, starts to tell you, well, these are other questions, similar questions that other people are asking who are trying to learn the same thing. That might be quite helpful to a learner. And so those are some of the things that we've experimented with. And then we've come up with the idea, which is hardly a new idea, of learning paths, where you have steps along a path with reflection points where people can actually pause and think about what they're doing. And each step can have resources to enhance it or activities. And so a simplest path would just be annotating web pages. And if someone says, I found this site and that site, and these are my thoughts about why that's relevant, rather than just treating them discretely, if you coherently string them together, you might have a significant resource that you could offer to someone who wants to learn about something if someone is saying that this path actually helps them learn about it. The more complicated paths, and this is what we found we paid people to author paths. Of course, they created narrative and then embedded YouTube and Wikipedia. But they were academics, so they wrote textbooks. And they all produced these unbelievably complicated paths, with each step would take you like 20 hours to study. So arguably one could say, and we did consider doing it, we could take all of our open education resources, and these are in effect OU mini courses, 20 hours. One 20-hour course could be a step along the path of learning about something. But a path on its own isn't very interesting. What gets interesting is when paths spawn other paths. And this is where you get the real, the equivalent of the social networking, the Flickr, the YouTube. A learner comes along and is on a path is actually, this is how I would do it. And they publish another path. And they are creating more and more resources for a learner. But all those learners are trying to learn the same thing, but all of these new learning resources are being generated. And the hope is that this gets over this problem of academics not being particularly interested of contributing back into a system like this or into this type of thing. They will absorb the stuff and say, that was great, but I'm not willing to actually put my slant on it and then give it back to the community. Obviously, these paths then result in more argumentation. One path might support or challenge something else as well. So this is the type of thing that we've been exploring in the thing that we built. It ends up with this huge neat web of this conceptual network of ideas and connections with dialogue and argumentation. Interesting enough, if you layer it together with the social networking layer, you couldn't effect get what some people are starting to talk about as Web 3.0, a semantic web. You know, and this is really a lot of the ideas that have been going on in the university. We have one of the world's leading semantic web research groups, and bringing together the ideas that they have had with social networking in creating some sort of machine processable network, which will be helpful to people. We're doing for time. I better hurry. There's learning analytics as well, which is a key part of this thing as well. It's more important, not just Google Analytics, but trying to actually analyze the learning process. And we put a huge amount of effort into capturing data and looking at what is going on with the learning process, what has worked. If someone has made a connection with something, if someone has made an argument and supported it with a resource, what have other learners done? And try and track all that and make sense of it. And we have people full-time just analyzing the data that's come out of it. And finally, there's the learning recommendations. And what we've looked at doing is creating this sort of rack of recommendations. Other people can come in and build another engine and plug it in through an open API. Now, the first four of these, the commerce and the content, navigational and social, are already in existence. But when you get into these recommendation engines for connections and what we call learning power, you get into new territory, which maybe hasn't been explored quite as fully as it should be. Now, the learning power thing, we've been working with the University of Bristol, who are doing some really neat stuff. They've got a thing called LEELLI. If you Google LEELLI, you'll find effective lifelong learning inventory. In effect, what they're doing is with an online questionnaire is measuring people's capacity to learn and then providing a mechanism with the support from a mentor to change the aspects of their learning that they're good at. So for me, my dream scenario has always been that we create something which is almost the equivalent of the best teacher you've ever had sitting in the corner, and whenever you want to ask them a question, you can just go like that and then come over and help you. In other words, imagine a learning environment where the system is saying, you're stuck, and the system is actually saying, well, 25 other people had a very similar learning capacity to you, and this is what they did, and 75% of them actually succeeded and moved on, and the other 25% didn't. This is what they did. If you could actually start to create that real intelligence and make serious recommendations to help the learning process, that would be great. And that's really the ambition of the work we've been doing. But at the end of the day, those building blocks still have to recognize that core of what's already out there. So if somebody wants to use Facebook, they want to use Facebook. So one idea is that perhaps, this whole thing that we've been building could just be a sidebar somebody could use in Facebook. Why does it have to be a website they go to? Why can't the functionality be available? But if they want to live in Facebook, let them live in Facebook. Technically, that's doable. It's not impossible to do. So finally, what of the future? Well, I think there's a real opportunity for open social learning. Obviously, this whole idea of creating not only to create the learning communities, but to sustain them. I was interested in Alejandro's saying about people coming to Facebook and say it's great, but for how long? And then they get bored. So would you bet your house on Facebook? Would you bet all your money that Facebook will even exist in 3 years' time? I don't know. I don't think I would. It probably will, but I don't know whether it will or not. But can you create and nurture a real learning community? Can you extend reach? So this stuff's available to everybody. I mean, maybe it was ambitious, but one of the reasons we got into the open educational resources area was to make our material available to third world Africa. We had a vice chancellor in South Africa, and she was very passionate about making free materials available to Africa and other parts of the world. The idea of a personalized learning experience is self-evident, and I think I'm preaching to the converted here, that I think everyone in this room probably recognizes that people expect a personalized learning experience. The thing that's held traditional education back, the English word is the cohort, a group of people who all start studying on the same day and all finish studying on the same day, so they all have to have an equal experience. Well, I think we're well past that now, and it is all about the individual learner, not about cohorts of learners. This stuff empowers teachers. There'll always be a place for teachers. It most certainly does not replace teachers, but it definitely empowers them. It's the hardest thing in the world to stand in front of a classroom in a lecture hall every day and be funny. And I can think of 2 or 3 great teachers I had in my entire education career. But I think a lot of this stuff really empowers them, and we're seeing a lot of good examples now of teachers being empowered by all this stuff. And finally, it might well sustain a learning marketplace, and the learning marketplace itself might provide the sustainability for open education resources. Because as I said earlier, at the end of the day, someone's got to pay if you're giving stuff away one way or the other, and maybe a learning marketplace will become a reality. Okay, I better stop there. I was asked to put up a few questions just in case no one could think of anything to ask. So just first one, to be really controversial perhaps, will community accreditation become a reality? And the reason I raise this is because we've already seen examples of it. Sitting in the front row here, we have Stephen Downes, a notable A-list blogger. There's a number of A-list bloggers. I don't think, Stephen, you've ever done a degree in blogging, have you? Do you have any formal qualifications in blogging? The community decided that this guy's worth reading, and there's other people, and other people are making money. Michael Feldstein, I think, gets paid pretty well from Oracle, and a lot of it might be because of his blogging ability. So people can make careers off the back of that without any formal qualifications based on community accreditation. So that it may not be as fanciful as one thinks. The VLE, is that just getting in the way? Or can we just consider it as a tool that's helpful? And finally, how do we get motivators interested in this stuff? We can't get most of our academics interested in our core stuff, never mind open social learning. So you may have other questions, but that might help. Thank you.